Hello, everyone, and welcome to the seventh webinar of 2022, organized together between the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science and the IPERION Heritage Science Academy. Our webinar series has a big range of topics, and the topic of today is a particularly interesting and at the same time an extremely urgent topic to cover. And we will be looking at climate change and cultural heritage. And our speaker today, Dr. Johanna Leissner, will present us an important policy initiative, the EU Open Method of Coordination Group. I'll say a few words about our speaker today. Johanna Leissner is We'll talk about the challenges of climate change and cultural heritage from her point of view and from her point of view as the chair of the Open Method of Coordination Group. She is a chemist, but has been working for over 20 years in cultural heritage research with a focus on environmental pollution and then climate change impacts on heritage. She's currently the coordinator of the German E-RIHS project, KERES project, on the impacts of extreme climate events on built heritage and historic gardens and landscape. As I already said, she's the chair of the EU OMC expert group on climate change and cultural heritage. It's a great pleasure for me to be hosting this series, this webinar today, and over to you, Johanna.
Thank you, Matija, for this kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I try now, we had some technical difficulties. I'm very sorry, but I try to share now my screen to show some of the slides of my presentation. Good afternoon. As Matija already said, I would like to share with you the results of 1.5 years of work of the experts from 28 countries in Europe. We have published the report on last week on the 7th of September, and you can see this on the slide. You will find the report under this internet link. The title of our group was Strengthening Cultural Heritage Resilience for Climate Change, where the Green Deal meets cultural heritage. What is it about this OMC group? As Matija already said, it is the open method of coordination and bringing together 28 countries from Europe, 25 European member states and 3 associated countries have sent their delegates to this expert group. And the associated countries were Iceland, Switzerland, and Norway. And only 2 EU member states have been missing, and that was Bulgaria and Luxembourg. So what was our task in this OMC group? First of all, it is really something very special because it is the first time that the topic of climate change has received a political mandate. It is the political mandate of the Cultural Affairs Committee of the European Council that was given to us to set up this OMC group. Our mandate consisted of identifying the state of play in the EU and in the member states. We had to look into what are the current and emerging threats and impacts of climate change on cultural heritage. Can we find and collect and exchange good practices and innovative measures for the protection of cultural heritage in the different European countries? We also wanted to examine the contribution cultural heritage can make to mitigate CO2 and also to fight against climate change in line with the Green Deal's goals. And finally, of course, this OMC group also should contribute to raise awareness and to contribute to capacity building. And at the very end, we have produced a report and recommendations for the EU and for the member states. So our first results after 1.5 years was we asked our members, what is the situation of cultural heritage and climate change in policies in your countries? So we found out that 9 countries do not include at all cultural heritage in any policies. So that is quite a high number. Then in 7 countries, some plans exist for coordination of climate change and cultural heritage. 15 countries, in 15 countries, policies which are covering cultural heritage do at least mention climate change. And 12 countries have climate change policies which mention cultural heritage. The main difficulty we found out was that the different ministries were responsible for different topics, and there was a lack of coordination and collaboration between these different these different ministries. In some cases, they didn't even talk to each other. And only one country had given any answer. So very advanced, for example, are the countries Spain and Italy, which have, especially Italy has a special plan for the national adaptation to climate change. And this is very important because the EU has also financial schemes, for example, the recovery and resilience plans, where cultural heritage could be included and would receive money from this recovery and resilience package. But if it is not included in the national adaptation and resilience plans, it will be very difficult that cultural heritage can receive money. Our next results were dealing with, we asked our experts, what do you think are the threats, the most important threats to cultural heritage which come from climate change? And it is no surprise that severe precipitation and long heat waves, as we have experienced that in last year with the big precipitation and flooding we have experienced in Europe. And this year we had long heat waves and droughts. So these were the threats which came immediately to the minds of our experts. But also sea level rise, because many countries in the European Union have along their coastlines a lot of World Heritage sites, for example. On the place 5, they named indirect threats. So indirect threats, for example, socio-economic impacts, that less money given to cultural heritage because we need the money for other topics like coping with the pandemic, but also coastal erosion was named. Strong winds also have a very important impact on mainly the built heritage. Gradual climate change, which is also taking place, was named on place 8. Too high or too low humidity has a very important impact on all kinds of materials. On place 10 was put the increase of pests. Different species are coming according to the climate change, for example, to northern countries or middle European countries, which are known only maybe in tropical countries, and the dieback of vegetation, which is often the case in historic gardens and cultural landscapes, which are the impacts of severe long heat waves and droughts. And also in cultural landscapes, it is the migration of foreign species. And in cultural and historic gardens, for example, you cannot just exchange one type of tree against another one, because that is the whole concept of a historical garden, has of course to follow the historic vegetation plans. And here a big discussion is going on how historic gardens can really adapt to climate change and not losing the overall appearance and image of a historic garden. Another question we have asked our experts was, what is the risk potential by type of heritage? What do you think, what kind of heritage is mostly impacted by climate change. And since many of our experts came from the heritage building sector, of course, building and monuments were listed as number one. On second, cultural landscapes, and then underwater heritage. And the least answers we have received from movable heritage. So the heritage and the collections which is displayed in museums, in archives, in libraries. So here that shows that there is still a lack of research also going on. What is the impact of climate change on indoor conditions? And here in this overview, we have asked our experts how in your national policies cultural heritage is covered. And we have asked specifically 3 policies. That is the National Sustainability Strategy, the National Climate Adaptation Plan, and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. And here you can see the 12 countries which have covered all 3. So this is Austria, Czechia, Greece, Spain, Croatia, Norway, Portugal, and Romania. And the other ones I cannot see yet, but just a second. These are Slovenia and I think Italy. So these countries, they all have mentioned cultural heritage in these 3 different national policies. But whenever we look into detail, what exactly is said, what are the measures you are doing in these policies, often cultural heritage is only mentioned without any further explanation. And that also weakens, of course, cultural heritage in the fight against climate change if there are no more specific plans in these policies to deal with cultural heritage in times of climate change. It looks very good, but if you look into the details, there's still a lot of room for improvement. And here you can see the result. What I think is the centerpiece also of our work of 1.5 years. We tried to find good practice examples in all the countries in Europe, what they are doing to fight against climate change, and also what kind of contribution they can make to mitigate climate change. And in the beginning, it was very, very difficult to find these good practice examples, because in many countries, and especially also in my country, in Germany, it was very difficult because we did not know whom shall we contact, who has all the information, and where can we find this information. There is no data platform where we can easily access these kind of information. So that was a kind of a detective story. We had to act like investigative journalists to find all these 83 good practice examples. But finally, at the end, we were able to find 83 best practice examples from 26 countries in Europe. Only 2 who were the members of our OMC group could not deliver any good practice examples. And it showed that most of these good practice examples were driven by research projects. So research is really an indispensable driver to protect cultural heritage from climate change. And these good practice examples, which we have collected, are a unique source of inspiration for everyone, not only in Europe, but also beyond Europe, for many other regions in the world. And they are also a unique source where we can look for upscaling, how we can use these good practice examples to be upscaled in other parts of the country and in other parts of Europe. So I only want to show you some examples from our best practice examples. And that comes, for example, from the chapter of adaptation and mitigation. Here I have listed 2 examples. One is from Austria. It is about the evaluation of an historic air cooling system from the 19th century. And that showed that this air cooling system, which can be, which is operational without additional energy from outside, that this can reduce the heat in the auditorium and that we can save CO2. And this is especially important now, since we are suffering due to the war in the Ukraine and the war with Russia. We have this energy crisis, and that is really at the moment a very, very big problem also in the cultural heritage sector, especially in the museums, because they need a lot of energy for optimal indoor conditions so that our collections can survive. The other example comes from the UNESCO World Heritage City of Bordeaux. And here we can see that Bordeaux has been able to implement the urban planning regulation, and that changes in the city to combat climate change, and at the same time maintaining the requirements of the urban heritage. And they have installed practical measures. For example, they were installing thermal insulation in buildings, revegetation of inner courtyards to fight against urban heat. And these urban heat islands are very important problems, because we found out that sometimes in the city centers, in these urban heat islands, we have temperatures of up to 7 to 8 degrees higher than in the surrounding of the cities. Also, the greening of these inner courtyards has been contributing to biodiversity, to well-being and health improvement of the citizens. And they are also contributing to the needs of the residents. Another example which will follow the city of Bordeaux is now Strasbourg. And so these measures will be completed this year at the end of 2022. And this example shows very nicely that we can, on the one side, develop preservation together with also fighting against the climate change without compromising the cultural heritage. We can make our cultural and built heritage fit for climate change. Other examples from adaptation and mitigation is an example from Germany, and this is a castle from the 19th century embedded in a historic park. And here the measures are testing of climate resilient tree species, for example. They have also investigated how we can innovatively maintain trees and improve soil. They installed new irrigation systems and the promotion of biodiversity. The building complex will be climate neutral by 2025. And they are also using a Chinese reed. It is not from China, it is the name of the plant. It's called Chinese reed as a renewable raw material. And this is used, for example, in a glass heating plant. They also have installed photovoltaic systems, not on the roof of the historic castle, but in the whole complex, and also an electrical operation of machinery and equipment, which will receive their electrics from the photovoltaic system. And at the end, by 2025, they want to have 80% of the heating capacity is operated using self-produced renewable raw materials and electricity from the photovoltaics. My last example from adaptation and mitigation is from Norway, and it is about the contribution old buildings can make to fight against climate change. They have assessed 14 buildings of different age, size, and architecture. And they found out that it is very good to invest into the upgrading of these old buildings. And they have also made calculations that only after many, many years, only there is, for example, the break-even point with modern buildings, which were built to be very energy efficient. And that shows us that old buildings with their embedded gray energy already are climate friendly, and if they are upgraded very wisely, they are much better and more climate friendly than any new energy efficient building. Furthermore, this kind of procedures using old buildings are also contributing to solve the housing crisis, which we also have in Europe. We see a lot of abandoned old buildings, which are not listed buildings, but they are 80, 90, 70 years old. And it is important to invest into their upgrading so that they can survive and also can contribute to solve the housing crisis, while at the same time we can solve the climate crisis. This is really a very, very hot topic. This climate measures against heritage. Often they say we cannot become climate friendly and at the same time protect all the heritage. And with these best practice examples, of course, we need much more. We can at least show that that is not true. We can upgrade old buildings at the same time to mitigate also the climate impacts. And the renovation and rebuilding needs to be done, and not the buildings should not be demolished and build up new construction, as this is often the case, for example, in Brussels. Many of the new buildings, they are only 25 years old. They get demolished because they are not fit for purpose any longer, but it would be more wise and climate friendly to upgrade them and to rebuild them instead of demolishing them. And we need new energy certificates, because these energy certificates must consider cultural values together with the energy consumption of a building during its whole time of operation. And these are the values which are not taken into consideration. These energy certificates of today, they only use the values for a modern building and then apply to an old building, and that is not appropriate. And this is, we have shown also with some best practice examples from Austria. Historic buildings and old buildings often have lower follow-up costs in the building operation. And this is also something which is often overseen. As I just said, in Austria, they have calculated that a reduction of 5 to 10% already are there. And this will increase this will increase also compared to old buildings, which have generally more thick walls and also external shading. Many of the modern buildings, for example, I see in Paris, in Brussels, in Rome, they have no external shading anymore, and they think everything can be run by a climate control system, but this again needs a lot of energy. And so we have to look for solutions where you are using passive methods to cool down and heat the buildings in winter. Okay, the next. Yeah, our group also was very much involved in responding to the energy performance of the building directive and also to the energy efficiency directive. And here you can see only the first part of our text, which we have sent to DG Energy. And here we only wanted to state that it is very important to look into the whole life cycle of an old and historic building, and not just looking to how much energy it is using every day, but to take into account the whole life cycle from the construction of the building, and then the operation of the building, And in the future also, what kind of energy do we need in the future of a building? And all this contributes to the CO2 footprint. And this is so far not taken into consideration. And we hope that we can stimulate this kind of discussion with DG Energy to completely rethink their assessment, how they are assessing energy efficiency of buildings. As I said already in the beginning, we could show that research and innovation are really the indispensable drivers for the protection of cultural heritage in times of climate change. In our report, we have a specific chapter devoted to research and innovation, and we have looked into what are the research needs for basic and applied research in the future, because we have collected a lot of information already, but we also found out that we still have a lot of deficiencies and gaps, especially gaps in understanding, but also gaps in data. So we need to carry out more in-depth studies on the behavior and the climate history of cultural heritage materials, be it organic, inorganic, or composite materials in times of climate change. We still don't know what is the impact of gradual climate change on the behavior of many materials. And for this, we also need to invest into studies based on modeling and simulation. So we need to introduce more modeling and simulation tools, how the materials behave in times of climate change. We need to invest into studies on the compatibility of adaptation measures with cultural heritage guidelines, and also to see how innovative materials behave. This is what we can study in modeling and simulation tools. We also have not yet investigated what is the role of concurrent extreme climate events. And this is something what has been shown in the past years, that concurrent extreme climate events can occur together. So we can have heavy rainfall at the same time, followed by severe droughts, and this can also cause tipping points. And this is a part of research, I think, which is completely not yet studied. So what are the concurrent extreme climate events and tipping points for cultural heritage? This is something for the future what we have to start right now, because these concurrent extreme climate events are happening more and more often even in the near future. Very important is also, and this was very difficult to find, is long-term monitoring. We need to have long-term monitoring data, how cultural heritage objects are behaving. So this kind of information we can only get from long-term monitoring. So we need to use sensors, three-dimensional documentation. We need to use for this also artificial intelligence and machine learning processing to get these data. And also, what I have already referred to, is we need to invest also to assess the total life cycle of traditional materials, of old and new conservation materials also. We have a lot of new conservation materials, but what is their life cycle assessment? How long, how do they behave? Are they really fit for the next 30 years? And what is the carbon footprint to synthesize these new conservation materials? And what is the carbon footprint of these old conservation materials? So there is still a lot of room for new research. We have also to investigate the opportunities, how we can reuse old building materials, taking into account that we have to establish new quality controls for recycling materials. How fit are recycling materials? What is their carbon footprint? Only a few topics which are listed in our report, what research and innovation needs for the future in order to protect cultural heritage.
Johanna, you asked me
So
to give
what
you a
are
sign
some
when
key
30
messages?
minutes are over.
Oh, okay. I'm already at the very end. So only to short some key messages we have given in our 10 recommendations. You will find these 10 recommendations in our report after the executive summary. So cultural heritage is really threatened by climate change in an unprecedented speed and scale. That means we need to invest to protect cultural heritage from climate change. But at the same time, cultural heritage offers also solutions and inspiration to solve the climate crisis. For example, traditional knowledge, traditional construction materials, traditional buildings, they all can contribute to solve the climate crisis. And this traditional knowledge is often forgotten, and also the traditional skills are about to disappear. Cultural heritage and climate change together need to be considered in all policies and all planning decisions, especially in the planning decisions, because when cultural heritage is not considered right in the beginning, when planning decisions are made, then it is often too late to include cultural heritage. And how important it is to include cultural heritage in all mainstream policies can be seen that in the European Green Deal, which is the most important policy instrument of the European Union right now, cultural heritage was not mentioned at all. And that happened after we had in 2018 the European Year of Cultural Heritage. We need cooperation on all levels. So in research together with climate research, but also we need to cooperate with policy levels, with decision-making levels, and also with many different disciplines. And research programs are the indispensable drivers for the implementation. And here it's not the EU which is in a gap and has deficiencies. These research programs are missing mainly on the national level. That is one of the most important findings of our report. National authorities, they must invest into research programs because only in these programs we are building up capacities. We can train and upskill our experts, our scientists. The collection of 83 best practice examples has shown that old and traditional buildings or the art of making, for example, dry stone walls are sustainable and climate friendly. And it is more climate friendly to repair than to demolish. A very important deficiency and gap is that we need a common platform, both on EU level and on national level, to collect all the relevant information concerning how to protect cultural heritage in times of climate change. And we need incentives on national, regional, and local level to invest into cultural heritage. We need monetary and fiscal policies. And we have today no data about the economic costs. What is ahead of us? How much money do we need to adapt and mitigate our cultural heritage? And that is very vital in order to set up programs and measures against the dreadful impacts of climate change on cultural heritage. And finally, we will probably not be able to save all the cultural heritage. We need also a discussion, a broad discussion on what are we going to do about the losses we will see in the future. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to many questions, and I want to conclude with the next webinar, which will be, I don't know when. Oh yes, on the October 10th, and it will be Jana Koller, where she will be speaking about the evaluation and monitoring of S3 infrastructures. Thank you so much.